Warning: the following content contains descriptions of sensitive events. For 28 years, the disappearance of a high school class in rural Oregon has been a ghost story whispered in hushed tones, a collective wound that never truly healed. Everyone in Oak Haven assumed it was a tragic accident, a bus lost to a remote logging road or an unseen ravine swallowed by the vast, indifferent woods. Search parties scoured the mountains, volunteers combed creek beds, but nothing. Just silence. The world moved on, but Oak Haven remained frozen in time, forever marked by that terrible spring day in 1995. Until a hiker, 28 years later, stumbles upon a rusted school bus deep in the woods, far off any known trail. Its exterior eerily undisturbed, like a time capsule. Inside, a chilling discovery awaits. Evidence that proves this wasn't an accident. It was a ritual. If you see someone being disrespected like this, like and tell us in the comments what you would do. The year was 1995, and life in Oak Haven, nestled between rolling hills and dense evergreen forests, moved at the pace of the seasons. It was a quiet town, the kind where everyone knew your name, and the biggest annual event was the county fair. At its heart was Northwood High School, a sturdy brick building filled with the hopeful chatter of its students. Especially vibrant was Ms. Evans's senior class, a tight-knit group of 30 young souls on the cusp of everything. They were bright-eyed and full of dreams. College scholarships pinned to bulletin boards, futures sketched out in notebooks. Plans for graduation parties bubbling in excited whispers during lunch breaks. Ms. Evans, a woman whose warmth was as constant as the morning sun through the classroom windows, saw not just students, but 30 unique futures waiting to unfold. Her hopes were intertwined with theirs. Their successes felt like her own. The air in their classroom hummed with anticipation for their upcoming field trip, a weekend excursion to the state capitol. Maps were unfolded, itineraries discussed, permission slips signed with eager hands. They pictured museums and historical sites, maybe even a fancy dinner, a taste of the wider world beyond Oak Haven's quiet embrace. Laughter echoed in the halls. Sunlight streamed through windows, catching dust motes dancing in the light. The scent of freshly mown grass from the baseball field drifted in on the spring breeze. The town, small and trusting, wrapped its collective arms around these children, proud of their achievements, excited for their journey. There was a vulnerability in their innocence, a serene unawareness of the shadow that sometimes lurks unseen, even in the most peaceful corners of the world. The morning of the trip arrived, marked by the low rumble of the school bus pulling into the parking lot, its yellow paint gleaming in the early light, waiting to carry away Oak Haven's dearest hopes. The morning air hung crisp and cool in the school parking lot, carrying the scent of damp asphalt and burgeoning spring leaves. Beneath the wide, hopeful sky, a knot of students and parents gathered, a vibrant, restless energy vibrating through the crowd. This was the day, the long-awaited field trip to the state park. Goodbyes were a tangled mess of eager anticipation and reluctant separation. Teenagers, trying to project an air of cool independence, submitted to final, fierce hugs, burying faces in parents' shoulders for just a moment too long before pulling away, eyes bright with excitement. Parents offered last-minute reminders about packed lunches and staying together, their voices a little tighter than usual. Pride swelled in their chests, watching their children embark on this adventure. But beneath the surface, a subtle tremor of anxiety pulsed, the universal parental worry for a child venturing out of sight. It was a quiet, unspoken language exchanged in lingering glances and squeezed hands. There, Squatting near the entrance was the bus. It was one of the older ones from the district fleet, faded yellow paint showing its age, a fine layer of dust coating its exterior from countless previous journeys. Numbered simply 7 on its side, it possessed no remarkable features, just a functional vehicle waiting to perform a routine task. Behind the wheel sat Mr. Henderson, his familiar face framed by receding gray hair, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. He was a fixture around town, a man known for his quiet demeanor and steady driving. He offered a small, almost imperceptible nod as groups of students boarded, their backpacks jostling as they found seats. The interior smelled faintly of old vinyl and disinfectant. Slowly, the metal doors hissed shut, sealing the children inside their temporary metal shell. A final wave through the grimy windows, a chorus of shouted "I love yous" met by teary-eyed smiles from the asphalt. The bus engine, a low, rumbling growl, shifted pitch, and with a jolt that sent a ripple through the passengers, bus number 7 began to move. It pulled away from the curb, the crowd of parents shrinking in its rectangular rearview mirror, their hopeful waves slowly lowering as distance grew. The bus turned onto Elm Street, lumbering steadily forward, a yellow Beetle carrying its precious, laughing, unaware cargo away from the familiar safety of the school and towards a destination none of them could truly fathom. The bus roared, a metallic beast devouring the miles. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunbeams that speared through the windows, illuminating pockets of animated faces. Outside, the familiar sprawl of suburban homes melted away, replaced by rolling fields that gradually gave way to the dense, whispering pines and jagged peaks of the mountains. The air inside buzzed with adolescent energy, a symphony of hushed giggles, shared secrets whispered loud enough to carry, and bursts of uninhibited laughter echoing off the low ceiling. The teacher sat near the front, a quiet observer amidst the joyful chaos. Watching them, a wave of warmth washed over her. These kids, vibrant and hopeful, were her responsibility, her pride. She saw Emily sharing earbuds with Liam, their heads close together. Mark attempting a magic trick with a deck of cards, fumbling but eliciting appreciative groans. Chloe and Maya sketching furiously in their notebooks, periodically dissolving into quiet fits of laughter. She harbored such deep hopes for this trip, not just for the educational experience it promised, but for the memories they would forge, the bonds they would strengthen. Let them just be kids, she thought. For a little while longer, it felt like a precious, fleeting moment suspended in time. Yet as the sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows across the landscape, a different feeling began to seep in. It was subtle at first, like a cold draft in a warm room. The road they were on seemed to narrow, the trees pressing closer, their branches clawing at the sky. She glanced at the driver, a man hired specifically for this remote destination. He hadn't spoken since they left the school lot. His eyes, she noticed in the rearview mirror, were fixed straight ahead, unblinking, utterly devoid of expression. His hands gripped the wheel with a strange, almost unnatural stillness. The familiar drone of the engine suddenly seemed louder, more ominous. The name of their destination, Blackwood Falls, which had sounded quaint on the brochures, now echoed in her mind with a peculiar, unsettling resonance. It felt less like a place and more like a warning. The bus didn't slow. It just kept pushing deeper into the darkening woods. The silence from the front of the vehicle, a stark contrast to the dwindling, hesitant laughter behind her. Then, without warning, the bus veered sharply off the main road onto a narrow gravel track that disappeared into the suffocating shadow of the pines. The bus coughed to a halt, the sudden silence deafening after miles of rattling metal and adolescent chatter. Outside, the world felt older, hushed. They had arrived at Blackwood Creek, a place rumored to have swallowed paths and whispers for centuries, nestled deep within a forgotten fold of the Cascade foothills. Sunlight, thin and cool, filtered through a canopy of immense, impossibly old pines, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to shift just outside their direct gaze. As the door hissed open, the students tumbled out, a bright, noisy flood of youthful energy spilling onto the soft, needle-strewn ground. Their wonder was immediate, palpable. Gasps at the sheer scale of the trees, excited pointing at moss-covered rocks that looked like sleeping giants. The thrill of stepping onto earth that felt untouched. Laughter echoed unnervingly in the dense quiet, a sound too sharp for the ancient stillness of the place. Mr. Harrison watched them, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He saw their vibrant curiosity, the complete lack of awareness of the heavy, watchful silence that pressed in from the edges of the clearing. It wasn't just the usual isolation of deep woods. There was a palpable wrongness here, a cold thread woven into the crisp air, a sense that they were not merely visitors, but trespassers, on ground that held its breath. He scanned the perimeter, noting how the light seemed to drain color from everything but the students' bright jackets, how the birdsong, present only moments ago, had ceased entirely. A shiver traced its way down his spine, unrelated to the cool air. This wasn't just a field trip anymore. They had stepped across an invisible threshold, leaving the familiar world far, far behind. He needed to gather them, to lay down the ground rules before anyone strayed too close to the whispering darkness at the forest's true edge. The distant sound, a low, steady thrumming, cut through the tense silence of the woods long before Sheriff Brody saw it. He led the small search party, eyes scanning the dense undergrowth, a cold knot tightening in his stomach with every passing, empty hour. Then, through a break in the trees, he saw the familiar flash of yellow. Relief, sharp and potent, surged through him, quickly followed by confusion. The bus wasn't on the main road, not even the paved access route. It sat tucked away on a little-used logging trail, deeper than they had anticipated, angled almost deliberately towards the thickest part of the forest. As they drew closer, the thrumming resolved itself into the unmistakable idle of a diesel engine. It was running. He approached alone, the others holding back, their faces etched with the same wary uncertainty that now clawed at his own gut. The bus looked intact, the yellow paint slightly dulled, the windows reflecting the overcast sky like blind eyes. He reached the folded doors near the front, a sense of profound unease settling over him. Why running? Why here? He tried the handle. It turned easily. He pulled the doors open, and the idling engine's drone grew louder, a monotonous, unnerving heartbeat in the sudden, heavy silence that fell inside. The smell hit him first, a warm, cloying mix of diesel exhaust, stale vinyl, and something else, something metallic and inert, like old blood or cold machinery. He stepped inside. His boots squeaked on the ribbed rubber floor, the only sound besides the engine's persistent hum. His gaze swept the rows of empty seats, yellow plastic backs, slightly worn vinyl cushions, still neatly flipped forward. No backpacks slung over the edges, no crumpled paper or discarded snacks, no sleepy heads resting against dusty windows. Nothing. The sun, breaking through the clouds just then, sent a shaft of light through the front windshield, illuminating dancing motes of dust in the air that felt thick and dead. The vibration of the engine resonated up through the floor into his legs, a physical manifestation of the wrongness. Hope withered and died inside him, replaced by a vast, terrifying void that mirrored the empty interior of the bus. It was all there, the familiar frame, the humming engine, but the life, the chaos and noise and simple human presence it was meant to contain had simply vanished. His eyes caught on something small, tucked between the seatback and cushion of the front row passenger seat. A child's drawing, slightly creased, depicting a lopsided sun and stick figures holding hands. It felt like a relic from a lost world, utterly out of place in this perfectly still, perfectly empty vessel. The bus wasn't just found, it had returned, like a ghost ship, having offloaded its passengers into the absolute nowhere. And the drawing, pristine despite the circumstances, felt less like something lost, and more like something left behind, waiting. The silence inside the running bus screamed louder than any sound. The finder, a man named David, stumbled back down the 3 steps, boots scraping on the metal floor, eyes wide, scanning, hoping, praying this was some cruel joke, that 34 kids were just hiding. He ran around the bus's perimeter, his breath catching in ragged gasps, shouting names into the thick, indifferent woods. Sarah, Michael, anyone! Only the drone of the engine and the rustle of unseen leaves answered. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the adrenaline. He fumbled for the old flip phone in his pocket, his fingers clumsy. Dialing 911 felt like dialing a number from another world, one where buses weren't found idling, empty, miles off any road. Hello? Yes, I found the bus, the school bus. But they're not here. The kids. They're gone. The dispatcher's calm questions felt distant, unreal. He tried to explain the impossibility of it all. The engine still humming, the doors open, the terrifying absolute absence within what felt like moments. Though time had warped into a meaningless concept, a single patrol car, then another, bounced down the rough track. 2 deputies, young faces hardened by routine calls, approached tentatively. Their initial expressions of confusion, a bus out here, curdled instantly into something else as they saw the scene David had described, the sheer wrongness of it. The bus sat like a beached whale, engine rumbling against the unnatural quiet, its empty rows of seats bathed in the weak afternoon light, filtering through the dust-streaked windows. It was a tableau of ordinary turned horrific. One deputy cautiously boarded the bus, his movements stiff, while the other stayed back, eyes sweeping the dense tree line. The air crackled with an unspoken dread, a shared understanding that this wasn't just a lost vehicle or a simple accident. This was something vast, something terrifyingly unprecedented, and the wilderness held its breath, keeping its secrets close as more sirens wailed in the distance, promising only the start of an unimaginable search. The news ripped through the small town like a sudden storm, tearing away the fragile hope built over days of frantic searching. When the call confirmed the bus was found, the air didn't fill with relief, but a sickening, heavy silence. Then came the swarm. Helicopters, their rotors beating a relentless, anxious pulse overhead, descended onto makeshift landing zones near the forest edge. Dozens of police cruisers, emergency vehicles, and unmarked cars churned dust on the rural roads, bringing with them a flurry of uniformed officers, K-9 units, and grin-faced investigators. Yellow tape, stark against the green undergrowth, began to cordon off a vast perimeter, a visual manifestation of the unfolding nightmare. Parents, who had spent hours clutching worn photographs, their eyes glued to the road, now huddled closer, the cold seep of fear numbing their anticipation. The collective breath of the town hitched, held taut in their chests. Lead investigators, their names quickly becoming whispered anchors in the rising tide of dread. Detective Miller, known for his quiet persistence, and Agent Davies, sharp and focused, arrived on the scene, their initial questions guarded, but their movements spoke volumes. They moved with a grim efficiency, assessing the difficult terrain, the sheer scale of the task ahead. Initial theories, whispered among the first responders, ranged from a terrible accident, a slide off a hidden embankment, to something far more deliberate, a possibility no one dared voice too loudly, yet it hung heavy in the humid forest air. The bus itself, half hidden by overgrown brush, became the focal point, a macabre stage under the intrusive glare of portable lights. Forensic teams, meticulous and silent, moved around and within the rusted metal shell. They dusted for prints, bagged potential evidence, their movements precise, clinical. Every scratch, every broken window, every detail of the bus's resting place was documented, photographed, and catalogued. Outside the tape, the parents waited, the sound of their own heartbeats amplified by the terrifying quiet between the helicopter passes and the distant commands. The agonizing slowness of the forensic work stretched minutes into hours, transforming their desperate hope into a cold, shared dread. This wasn't a rescue operation anymore. The sheer number of investigators, the focus on the bus's interior and surroundings, screamed of something else entirely. The silence from the scene, broken only by the mechanical sounds of the search, was a heavy blanket, suffocating them in uncertainty. Inside the bus, under the harsh forensic light, investigators were beginning to find things that didn't fit the narrative of a simple accident. The shockwave that had begun at the edge of the woods rolled violently back into the heart of the town, slamming hardest into the families. It wasn't just news, it was a physical blow, knocking the air from lungs, stealing the light from eyes. Parents moved through a daze, their world tilting sideways. Disbelief warred with a cold, crushing certainty. For years they had carried a sliver of desperate hope, a fragile, whispered possibility that somehow, somewhere, their children were still alive. Now, that hope was a sharp shard in their hearts, replaced by an agony so profound it felt like the air itself was thick with it. Mrs. Gable sat by the window, tracing patterns on the glass, her gaze fixed on the empty swing set in the yard, where her daughter had laughed just days before everything changed. Mr. Henderson, usually a man of booming laughter, stood silent and gaunt at the town hall, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of unspeakable grief. From this shared abyss of sorrow, a raw, fierce energy began to pulse. Parents, once isolated in their private pain, found each other in the town square in tear-filled living rooms, online forums blooming in the dark corners of the internet. Voices, initially choked with sobs, grew steadier, louder. They formed committees, organized vigils under the cold night sky where candle flames flickered against tear-streaked faces, and their movement was a slow, determined march toward the authorities' offices. They carried photographs, faded report cards, worn-out teddy bears, tangible pieces of the lives that had been stolen. Their collective strength, born from unimaginable pain, became a relentless pressure, demanding answers, refusing to let the investigation settle into silence. The town, wrapped in a shroud of shared grief, watched, waited, and felt the tremor of their demand echoing through the quiet streets. Their unified need for truth was a rising tide, threatening to engulf anyone who stood in its way. The initial burst of hope had long since curdled into a bitter, gnawing despair. Days bled into weeks, and the trail, once seemingly vivid around the recovered bus, went brutally, sickeningly cold. Investigators pored over the wreckage, the seats, the floor, the exterior, searching for anything solid. A stray fingerprint that wasn't a student's, a trace of unknown fiber, a tool mark, anything. But the bus, sitting stark and empty in the police garage, remained maddeningly silent, offering only baffling, contradictory whispers, or worse, nothing at all. Theories spun and collapsed like sandcastles against the tide. Were they runaways who met misfortune? Abducted? Had they wandered off into the vast, unforgiving wilderness? Each avenue was pursued with dwindling energy, only to dead-end against a wall of silence. There were no witnesses who saw anything useful that day, just vague recollections of a yellow bus disappearing down a tree-lined road. The media frenzy, a brief, intense spotlight, began to dim. Reporters packing up, headlines shrinking, moving on to the next crisis. But for the town, the silence was deafening, the wound gaping and raw. Detective Harding, his face etched with sleepless nights and countless cups of stale coffee, stared at the growing stack of unsolved leads, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on him like a physical force. He thought of the yearbook photos plastered on the corkboard, bright, smiling faces frozen in time, and the internal thought, sharp and unwelcome, cut through his exhaustion. Are they even? He couldn't finish it, not even in his own head. The families, attending endless, fruitless briefings, watched hope drain from the investigators' eyes, their own fear deepening into a constant, agonizing dread. They held on to worn t-shirts, stared at empty beds, and whispered names into the quiet rooms. A desperate, silent plea against the terrifying possibility that their children were gone forever, swallowed whole by the woods or something far worse, leaving behind only this crushing, empty silence and a single, rust-colored bus that held its secrets fast. Years blurred into years, marked by the steady tolling of the church bell and the quiet turning of seasons. Each spring, bringing a fresh layer of green to the woods, but no sign of the missing. The initial frenzy of the search cooled. The national news vans packed up their satellite dishes, and the case, once burning bright, settled into the chilling gray of unsolved. The town of Oakhaven adapted in its own scarred way. A granite memorial rose in the town square, listing the names of the lost students, perpetually adorned with faded ribbons and wilting flowers. School football games felt hollow. Graduation ceremonies echoed with absences. The lack of closure was a persistent ache, a phantom limb for the entire community, felt most acutely by the surviving families. Some homes became tombs of silent grief, shutters drawn tight against a world that had moved on. Other families splintered under the strain, marriages failing under the weight of unanswerable questions. Yet others found a quiet, resilient strength, clinging to each other, finding solace in shared sorrow and the simple rituals of daily life. A few, though, refused to let the memory fade into history. Among them was Arthur Pendleton, father of one of the missing, a man whose grief had forged itself into an unyielding obsession. Every evening, long after the town lights dimmed, a single window glowed in his small house. Inside, surrounded by stacks of faded case files, tattered maps, and corkboards plastered with cryptic notes, Arthur meticulously reviewed every detail, every dead end. The scent of stale coffee and old paper filled the cramped room as his fingers, calloused and worn, traced lines on outdated police reports. He chased down forgotten witnesses, wrote letters to cold case units. His hope, a fragile ember, he fiercely shielded against the prevailing winds of apathy and time. The whispers in town called him crazy, but Arthur didn't hear them. He heard only the silence where his daughter's laugh should have been, and a deep, persistent conviction that the truth was still out there, waiting to be found by someone stubborn enough to keep looking. One rainy night, sorting through boxes of his daughter's belongings that had been returned years ago, his hand brushed against something hidden in the lining of her old backpack, something that wasn't supposed to be there. Years had worn smooth the edges of grief, turning sharp pain into a dull ache, a constant hum beneath the surface of ordinary life. She had learned to navigate days, weeks, months, placing one foot in front of the other, carrying the heavy weight of the past, not lightly, but steadily. The missing, the lost, they were ghosts now, not just in memory, but in the very air of this quiet town. A story whispered by wind in the pines, a tragedy everyone had long ago filed away, unsolved. Perhaps unsolvable. Then the call came, thin and reedy over the phone line, cutting through the mundane sounds of afternoon traffic outside her window. It was from a hospice nurse, 20 miles away, speaking of a dying man, a man who hadn't lived in this town in decades, a man with a secret he couldn't carry into the earth. He mentioned a place near the old logging road, a place few remembered now, and a specific, small detail, the glint of something metallic, half buried beneath a particular cluster of rocks, something he'd seen long ago, dismissed and regretted ever since. The words dropped like stones into the quiet pool of her carefully constructed calm, shattering the surface, sending frantic ripples outwards. Her breath hitched, sharp and sudden, tasting of dust and years. The image of the location, half forgotten but instantly vivid, bloomed in her mind, overlaid with phantom sounds and smells from that distant time. Disbelief wrestled with a fierce, terrifying surge of hope that felt almost violent in its intensity. Could something so small, a single detail from a dying man, possibly unravel years of silence? Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fragile hope. If he saw something, what else was there? What horror had been hidden for so long beneath dirt and forgetfulness? Her hands trembled as she fumbled for the worn map she still kept tucked away, tracing the lines with a finger that felt suddenly clumsy, searching for the landmark the nurse described, her heart hammering a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. The air grew thick, heavy with the sudden return of possibility, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She looked out the window, the familiar landscape now charged with sinister potential, knowing instinctively that the long, dark night was far from over. And this small fragment was a key to unlocking something the world might wish had stayed buried. Driven by the cryptic words unearthed from the forgotten file, the small team of investigators followed the lead, a thread barely visible in the fabric of the past. It pulled them out of the bright city lights and into the deep, shadowed hollows nestled against the old mountain range. The air grew thin, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and the paved roads gave way to crumbling gravel tracks that seemed to swallow the sunlight. They pushed deeper, the silence of the woods pressing in, broken only by the crunch of tires and the rhythmic thump of their own hopeful, weary hearts. Each turn revealed more isolated cabins, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin, guarded by wary eyes that watched from behind lace curtains. Interviewing the few scattered residents was like pulling teeth from stone, suspicion, fear, and a deep-seated reluctance to speak about anything that happened decades ago hung heavy in the air. Some things, an old woman whispered, her voice brittle as dried leaves, are best left buried. Yet the fragmented whispers, the half-remembered faces, the repeated mention of an abandoned lodge at the edge of the forgotten logging road solidified their purpose. The lodge, they learned, wasn't just a place. It was rumored to be where the town's darker secrets sometimes gathered. A place steeped in a history best ignored. Arriving at the lodge, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the twilight sky, a dramatic chill settled over them, colder than the mountain air. Dust motes danced in the few remaining shafts of light, piercing the broken windows, painting the decay in eerie gold. The musty smell of rot and disuse filled their lungs, thick with the weight of untold stories. Inside, the silence was absolute, the floorboards groaning underfoot like the sighs of the dead. One of them, running a gloved hand along a grimy wall, felt a loose section. Behind it, a small, forgotten compartment. Inside lay a single, tarnished silver locket and a folded, brittle piece of paper. As they carefully unfolded the paper, revealing not names or addresses, but a series of strange symbols crudely drawn, the emotional climax tightened their chests. This wasn't just a place of history, it was a place of ritual. This discovery, cold and unsettling in their hands, felt less like an end to the trail and more like the opening of a door into something far more sinister, a path that required them to understand the meaning of these symbols and who might have used them. The character Alex ran a hand over the rusted metal of the bus seat frame. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, a metallic tang of rust mixing with damp earth and stagnant air. For weeks, they had scoured this bus, found deep in the woods, searching for answers. Everyone said it was empty, a dead end, just a tragic mystery. But Alex felt it in their gut. Something fundamental was missed. The sheer, impossible emptiness felt deliberate, not accidental. It screamed of intervention. They moved slowly along the aisle, eyes tracing the familiar patterns of faded yellow upholstery and cracked linoleum floor tiles. Each scratch, each stain, felt like a silent, mocking taunt. Stopping near the rear emergency exit, where the forest pressed close against the grimy windows, Alex knelt. The floor panel here seemed slightly off, the bolts less rusted than the others, almost as if disturbed more recently. A tremor ran through Alex's hand, a mix of fear and desperate hope as they fumbled for the stiff panel. It resisted, then gave way with a low, tortured groan of protesting metal, revealing not chassis, but a dark, enclosed compartment hidden beneath the passenger floor. A wave of cold dread washed over Alex, a stark, sickening contrast to the humid air. Inside the hidden space lay a complex array of small tubes and nozzles, snaking back towards tanks or reservoirs concealed deeper within the bus's undercarriage. It was a silent, sophisticated delivery system. The horrifying truth slammed into Alex with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from their lungs. This bus hadn't just been a transport or a drop-off point. It had been a mobile containment unit, a carefully engineered trap on wheels. The students, their youthful energy and laughter, now just ghosts echoing in the silence of these woods, had likely been overcome here, not by accident, but by something delivered subtly, insidiously, into the enclosed space of their journey. The chilling ingenuity of it was breathtaking, born of a mind cold enough to see a school bus full of teenagers as mere cargo to be processed. Alex stood, the discovery leaving them trembling, the metallic tang in the air now tasting like fear. They imagined the moments before the incapacitating agent took hold, confusion giving way to drowsiness, then an unnerving silence falling over the bus. Then, perpetrators, perhaps a hidden group operating from a nearby unknown base, would have simply opened the doors, engaged a mechanism, and removed the unconscious students, one by one, leaving the empty shell behind. as a perfect, baffling mystery for the world. The bus wasn't a misdirection from the location. It was the initial stage leading to the location, a dark prelude performed just feet from where they were ultimately taken. This wasn't a simple disappearance. It was an extraction, meticulous and cruel, executed with horrifying precision that hinted at the unspeakable purpose the students were meant to serve elsewhere. Near the edge of the revealed compartment, partially obscured by dirt, Alex spotted the faint, distinct imprint of a heavy boot, cleaner than the surrounding earth, the first tangible proof of presence on the bus floor itself, and a silent promise of the path taken after the bus fell silent. The sterile conference room felt impossibly small, filled with the suffocating weight of decades-old grief and simmering anticipation. He sat across the polished table, not behind a cage or bars, but flanked by legal counsel, the man who had orchestrated such profound sorrow. For years, they had chased shadows, whispered names, and followed dead ends, picturing a monster in their minds. The reality was chillingly ordinary. Tired eyes, thin lips pressed tight, a gray suit that seemed to absorb all light. Detective Miller watched him, a knot of cold fury tightening in his gut, the faces of the missing flashing behind his eyes. Beside the investigators sat the families, a united front of raw pain and quiet, trembling rage. Mrs. Henderson clutched a faded photograph, her knuckles white. Mr. Peterson stared intently, his jaw muscles twitching. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, years of questions poised to detonate. Then the prosecutor began, his voice cutting through the thick silence. The identity was confirmed, irrefutable evidence laid out, a meticulously planned act, not of passion or madness, but of calculated cruelty. His motive, when it came, was breathtakingly mundane, a bitter resentment born of perceived slights and professional jealousy, twisted into a monstrous vendetta against the community, a desire to inflict a wound so deep it would never heal. The injustice of it all landed like a physical blow. Lives extinguished, futures stolen, all for this? A quiet sob escaped someone in the back of the room. Miller saw the man flinch, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something perhaps akin to fear, quickly masked. Mrs. Henderson let out a guttural cry, not of sadness, but of pure, agonized fury, her grip on the photo trembling violently. The room erupted, a cacophony of heartbroken shouts and accusations, years of suppressed anguish finally finding its target. The man across the table remained impassive, a stone in the storm of their pain, his stillness a chilling testament to his detachment. Miller felt a surge of nausea, the sheer wrongness of it all overwhelming. This wasn't justice yet, only the laying bare of a horrifying truth. He met the eyes of another investigator, a silent acknowledgement of the long, arduous path that still lay ahead to secure closure for these shattered lives. The sterile courtroom air hummed, a stark contrast to the humid, pine-scented woods where the nightmare had begun. Years had blurred into a relentless pursuit, fueled by a raw wound that never healed. Now the man stood before them, his face pale under the fluorescent lights, the same face that had haunted their dreams for decades. It wasn't a formal trial, not in the traditional sense. Time and circumstance had complicated legalities beyond immediate resolution. But the truth, painstakingly pieced together from fragmented memories, unearthed evidence, and the chilling confession he'd finally... Sarah watched from the gallery, her knuckles white where she gripped the smooth wooden rail, the scent of stale coffee and old paper thick around her. She remembered the smell of fresh rain on the bus windows that last morning, the nervous energy bubbling through the aisle, the shared secrets whispered low. This man, this former teacher, had stolen all of that. Her heart ached with a dull, persistent throb, a physical manifestation of the loss, yet a fragile sense of victory bloomed in her chest. It wasn't the closure she'd once imagined. The students were still gone, their final moments a terrifying blank space in the narrative. But hearing him admit his role, hearing the cold facts spoken aloud, lifted a weight she hadn't realized was crushing her. A wave of heat rose in her cheeks. It wasn't triumph, not fully, but the quiet satisfaction of persistence. They hadn't disappeared into thin air, her mind screamed silently. They were taken. The man's eyes darted towards the gallery for a fleeting second, and Sarah met them, holding his gaze with a strength forged in years of grief and anger. He looked away first, a shiver running visibly down his arm. That small, involuntary tremor felt like a confession in itself, a physical manifestation of the truth's power. It wasn't a prison sentence, not yet perhaps, but the world knew. His carefully constructed lies had crumbled, exposing the rot beneath. But justice wasn't just legal. It was the public reckoning, the dismantling of his facade, the acknowledgement of the monstrous wrong. The air shifted subtly, no longer just stale, but carrying the faint metallic tang of something old and cold finally breaking. A guard shifted his weight near the door, the click of his shoe echoing in the sudden silence, a silent reminder of the process still unfolding. What came next, the full legal consequence, was still uncertain, but the core truth was out, a bitter, hard-won embrace after a lifetime of searching. The frantic whispers of speculation had finally died down, replaced by a heavy, shared silence across the valley. The truth, brutal and cold, settled upon the community like a shroud of winter frost, chilling them to the bone, but finally offering a painful clarity. With the mystery solved, the relentless, desperate hunt gave way to a different kind of sorrow, a communal grief that had nowhere left to hide. The focus shifted, slowly, painfully, from the consuming question of where to the enduring ache of remember. In a town square, where flyers had once plastered every surface with missing faces, stood a new structure. A long, low wall built of local fieldstone, etched with the names of the lost children. Each name a stark reminder of the innocence stolen, the futures extinguished. The air around it hummed with a quiet reverence. Families came, not searching eyes anymore, but eyes clouded with tears, hands tracing the cold stone, whispering forgotten lullabies or shared jokes only they would understand. The main character stood among them, a perpetual knot in their stomach, loosening just slightly, watching parents stand shoulder to shoulder, sharing a grief that had once isolated them in their individual nightmares. A foundation had been quietly established, its purpose etched into its name, the Evergreen Legacy Fund, dedicated to preventing such darkness from ever touching another child in their valley. This shared sorrow, the public acknowledgement of their collective wound, began to knit the community back together. The years of suspicion, the quiet blame, the gnawing uncertainty, they were not forgotten, but they were slowly being subsumed by a powerful tide of unity, forged in shared pain and the hard-won victory of truth. The fight had cost so much, demanded so much, but it had also revealed an unbreakable core of resilience. People who had been strangers, bonded over shared tears at the memorial wall, over planning community gardens in the children's honor, over raising funds for outreach programs. This wasn't the peace they had dreamed of, the one where the children simply came home, But it was a different, heavier peace, one built on the bedrock of remembrance and the grim understanding of the depths of human darkness. It was the peace of knowing, the peace of honoring, the peace of facing the horror together. Yet even as the first fragile tendrils of healing began to wrap around the community's heart, the silence that remained held secrets of its own, echoes of the past that the stones couldn't bury entirely. The raw wound of that time never truly closed, but slowly, haltingly, the town began to find ways to live around the scar it left behind. Initial shock gave way to a heavy, unifying grief, then a quiet, determined resilience. The empty spaces at the diner counter, in the school hallways, at Sunday service, remained constant, aching reminders. Yet the community refused to let silence claim the memory. Hands, once wrung in despair, clasped together in mutual support. Neighbors who had rarely exchanged more than a nod began sitting on porches, sharing stories not just of sorrow, but of the funny quirks, the bright dreams, the distinct laughter of those they had lost. A small garden bloomed in the town square, each vibrant flower a tribute, meticulously tended by volunteers whose quiet dedication spoke louder than any shouted accusation. The sound of children playing, once a painful echo, gradually returned, softer at first, then stronger, a hopeful counterpoint to the enduring ache. They built a simple, elegant memorial down by the river, a series of smooth gray stones etched with names, where on quiet evenings, wind chimes dedicated to the lost sang a mournful, gentle tune in the breeze. Standing there, watching the light play on the water, a wave of collective emotion would crest, a blend of deep sadness for the stolen future, profound gratitude for the bonds that held them, and a fierce protective impulse towards the innocence that remained. The town was irrevocably changed, marked by tragedy, but in that shared vulnerability, a new strength had been forged, an empathy that ran deeper than words, a silent promise to protect the light. Yet even in the quiet triumph of resilience, some shadows lingered, folded away inside, a personal weight carried long after the town had learned to breathe again. Special epilogue. Years turned into a decade, then two. The garden flourished, the river stones weathered, the chimes continued their song. The town, forever marked, became an unintentional beacon of turning sorrow into action. New programs blossomed. Mentorship for troubled youth, counseling services readily available, community watch initiatives that felt less like policing and more like neighbors looking out for each other's children. The pain was still there, a deep, persistent thrum beneath the surface of daily life. But it no longer paralyzed. It fueled. It reminded them of the fragility of innocence and the vital importance of shielding it with unwavering vigilance. The stories of the lost weren't just tales of absence. They became parables of the love that remained, the strength discovered in weakness, and the enduring hope that even from the deepest darkness, a legacy of protection could rise. Conclusion. The years settled like dust, covering the sharp edges of grief, but never truly erasing the imprint. For him, the one who had seen too much, the one who had carried the weight of the uncovering, the quiet hum of normal life remained subtly dissonant. There was no dramatic breakdown, no cathartic release, just a persistent weariness that settled deep in his bones. Joy felt muted, success less sweet. He performed the necessary actions of living, ate, slept, worked, but a part of him felt permanently altered, like a color had been drained from the world. Unpleasant emotions weren't a storm, but a constant, low-level drizzle, a mild cynicism, a quiet fatigue that sleep rarely lifted, a distribution of small, lingering anxieties about things unseen. He didn't dwell on the horror daily, but it was always there, a shadow in his periphery. One damp afternoon, walking home, he saw a child drop a brightly colored toy. Without thinking, he bent down, picked it up, and handed it back with a quiet nod. The child's smile, small but genuine, was a momentary flicker, a sliver of ordinary light cutting through the perpetual gray. A small, silent act of kindness in a world forever etched with the memory of its opposite.